Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 51, and today we're going to talk about how multicolor is this format and try to figure out a bit about what makes those multicolor decks work and what looks like maybe it does, but possibly doesn't. So, we're as always going to look a bit through the things that are important for them and things that are traps, and especially, I think, especially in five color decks, traps are an interesting aspect of it because we don't very frequently have formats where five color decks are so predominant as in here. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. As always, um, I would like to thank my sponsor, mtgazone.com. Again, with a bunch of articles coming in about new standard. I'm pretty sure that most of you play limited, but I did hear that the new standard is actually quite interesting, and especially if you like playing black. Uh, but despite being a bit black dominated, it's still very playable, I heard. And if you want to see which decks you should build, MTGA Zone, you don't have to look further than that. You can see some guides, sideboard guides, how to play guides, deck lists of successful players. So I would recommend looking through that. Maybe even you want to craft some cards because you don't quadruple everything via drafting and want to know which cards you might want to craft. Well, then just go and check which cards appear in multiple decks and just go for it. And with that out of the way, oh yeah, don't go to MTGA Zone right now. Just wait for the end of the seminar, please. But with that out of the way, I always start with the preamble, and today's preamble is: if you dig 17 lands, standard data table has a lot of hidden info. And I don't know, probably at least a large chunk of you have been to the 17land.com website and looked through the 17 lands data table. And looked at the metrics that you get on the standard card data table. But apart from the things that are apparent from that table, there is a lot of things that are not stated that they are there, but they are there. You just need to know how to extract them. And this week, normally on the second week, I already have the proper data. So the public data sets kind of big table with all the decks, records of individual decks and stuff like that. But this week I don't have it. So because of that, I don't. I was not able to do the things that I normally do on the second week. So I had to improvise and I had to figure out how to get extra information out. And you know what? Sometimes it's good to be forced to do something like that because, well, you have to be resourceful. And I think that, I was spoiled for most of my content creation career because I always get the early data from 17 lands. So yeah, big shout out to the guys that did help me with that. I mean, partially I was in the right place in the right moment because I was there and I got interested in 17 lands very early and I started doing my analysis from the data tables. But then, of course, spoiled with the nice data from much deeper data sets. I basically stopped using the table as often. I use it for the basic things, looking at the card win rate, game in hand win rate, ALSA, that kind of stuff. But there's more in there. There's so much more in there, but you just need to look a bit deeper. So, for example, let's look at this how the table normally looks like. So this is the table for DMU. You can choose the set, you can choose which type of draft you want to analyze, you can select users, and by the way, the top, bottom, middle users are on now for 17 lands. So that's interesting if you want to compare how the cards perform with best players and the medium players. You can choose colors, you can choose all type of decks. This is very important because I used it quite a lot for this analysis. Because apart from the two color decks, you can choose any combination of the 3-color, 4-color decks. And because of that, I was able to actually look at which cards are important for multicolor decks because I looked at every single combination of the 3-color, 4-color, and 5-color decks, and looked at and aggregated this data separately using the table. Basically, took me a bit of work, and I could have gotten it easier from the table that I normally use. But without the table, I was still able to get to some kind of level. Of course, you can do the time restrictions. That's also important. I didn't play with that just yet because it's just 2 weeks, so that's a bit too early to start trimming. Maybe on week 4, I can start looking at the data from second part of the format or something. But also in those columns that we see here, okay, there's name, that's okay. In the name, you can't get anything extra from the name unless there's some anagrams hidden. Color, that's not that important. Rarity, that's not that important because, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Number of the times the card was seen and number of the times the card was picked is an interesting thing that you can actually look at data, because this, if you divide those two numbers by each other, you can sort of see what percentage of the time do 17 lines user pick the card when they see it. And this is a very telling statistics. It's not given straightforward, but you can easily get it. So I mean, you can see that Sheldred, you will pick it probably around 90% of the time when you see it. But Wingmantle Chaplain only around 35% of the time that you see it, or something like that. 30, yeah, probably 35. So there is a difference between how you pick those cards, even though there's the difference in win rate is not so great. But people still do pass Wingmantle Chaplain, even 17 lines users, because maybe, especially in pack 2, pack 3, you don't have a deck to play it, and you have to basically pass it. I still pick it though. What else can we get from that? Something that I looked at in the Twitter thread that I did about the Wingmantle Chaplain was looking at the ratio of games in hand, that the card was in your hand, and games that it was not drawn. And if you look at it, it's roughly 50-50. So if 4,000 times that people didn't draw the Children when they played it, around 3,700 when they did draw, 9,000 here that they didn't draw Angel of Wrath, and 7,500 that they did. Here is almost evenly 50-50. So 4,500 didn't draw. Sphinx of Clear Skies, 4,400 did draw. So yeah, like between 40-50% of the time. And then we go to Wingmantle Chaplain, and it's 17,000 games people didn't draw Wingmantle Chaplain, 32,000 times did draw. So it's almost 60 something percent of the games people did draw Wingmantle Chaplain. And the fact that this ratio, and if I would draw this table lower and show all the cards, all of them would be roughly 40-50%. Except for this Wingmantle Chaplain and a couple of other cards. And this is, again, information that is not given like straight in your face. You need to extract it in some way, but it's important that you can actually look at those kinds of data and find those kinds of informations. Later today, I'm going to be actually looking from the information in those tables. I'm going to figure out more or less by approximation the speed of different archetypes. So how fast do games end when you play, let's say, Grixis, versus how quick do the games end when you play Esper. And this is also not written here anywhere. You don't have the duration of the game, but you can sort of calculate it out. So today's preamble is just basically think about this little table here, because there is a lot of things that that you can figure out, even though it's not specifically written that it's there. So it's always good to look at it sometimes and just think, like, what extra things can I extract from it? And I'm pretty sure that you will come up with many more other examples than the ones that I've given, because I'm sure I didn't find every single hidden feature that you can get out of here. Right. This is a brief recap of last week, but I did much better graphs for the article on mtgazone.com that I published a couple of days ago. It is basically showing that DMU is a format like no other. So last week I showed that was very different, but I only compared it with the last 4 formats. And here I did a much broader comparison. So I'm going to briefly lead you to the fact that this is a multicolor format like no other before. So basically, in the last 10 formats, I divided them into sort of three broad categories. One is the strictly two-color formats, like AFR, VOW, Midnight Hunt, Zendikar Rising. They have roughly 80% of the decks in those formats are strictly two-color decks, and roughly 15% or so are two colors with a splash. So again, approximately 95% of all the decks in those formats are two colors or two color splash. Second broader category is formats when you still have predominantly two color decks, but there is much more splashing. And this is like HBG, so the Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate, Kamigawa, Strixhaven, and Kaldheim. And these have, well, still over 50% of the decks are strictly two colors, but roughly 25 to 30% of those two color decks are splashing. So there's more splashing going on. And the total of the two color decks is reaching 90%, but also can be like below like 80%. So these are the sort of hybrid formats when two color, but some other strategies are also possible relatively frequently. So there's a third category, and that's three color formats, and only Streets of New Capenna was in that in the recent couple of years. Streets of New Capenna had only 32% of the decks were two colors, and more than half of those two color decks had splash. So there was only like 15% of the decks were strictly pure two color decks. They were quite rare in this format. They were not bad, they were quite good, but they were rare because the set was designed in such a way that it was difficult to draft a pure two color deck because of the amount of three color cards, amount of fixing that sort of naturally put you in towards splashing. And there is Dominaria United, which is weird hybrid somewhere between, but doesn't fit into any of the categories. It's still technically a two color format because like 55% of the decks are two colors. But 2/3 of those decks have splash. Again, number of pure two-color decks is roughly on the level of Streets of New Capenna. It's a bit more than 20%. Now, part of that result is due to how cards are coded on 17 lands, because I, of course, use 17 lands data for that. So kicker cards are counted as multicolor. Therefore, they will be, even if you put it in so they will tilt you towards having more splashes because they will count as multicolor cards, which means that if you play a white card with a blue kicker in your white-red deck, it might count as a splash in some situations. Now, it won't always happen because if you don't have a blue mana source, it won't count. But if you splash a mana source just to maybe play for the kicker spell, you don't need it for your deck to function because probably you can play without casting the kicker cost of that card. But the 17 lands data will count it as a deck with a splash. So part of those stats might be resulted to that caveat, but it's only part. I'm pretty sure that if you're quite happy playing a card without the kicker, you might not put the mana source to be able to pay the kicker because that ruins your chances of curving out early. So lots of people won't be doing that. So even though probably this number of splashes is slightly inflated, it probably is not inflated by a massive lot. And it's still, even if the number of pure two color decks would increase slightly, it's still a weird number of two color decks at 55% because it doesn't fit into any of those categories. Like it's 25 percentage points below the two color formats, 25 percentage points below um, below the three color format. Omnat Nods asks, is two color with more than one splash included? So this doesn't count, doesn't look at how many splashes constitute a splash. But yes, there can be decks that are two color decks and they have three splashed colors. And so they are technically like a diluted five color deck, but they will still count as a two color. And that's a problem that I can't solve using the table data from the basic thing. I will definitely look at those numbers through the lens of proper data when I can know what is a main color, what is a splash, and actually I can count how many pips of each colors are in the deck, and that's probably how I'm going to sort it out with the multicolor decks when I get the proper data set. Trying to see how many pips of each color are there, and based on that, assessing which colors are dominant. Okay, but that covers the two color decks in Dominaria, which already suggests that this is a format that is slightly weird. Now, as I said, Streets of New Capenna was a format that was a three color format predominantly. And 55%, roughly, of the decks were pure three color decks in that format. And there was a very small number, like around 8-9% of the decks that had three colors and a splash. And Streets of New Capenna was the only three color format in the last 10 sets. However, you also have Kaldheim and Strixhaven, which had three color decks at roughly 18-20% of the time. Difference between them being that in Strixhaven, those were three color decks. In Kaldheim, there were very often three colors with splashes. And I can guarantee you that some of those splashes were again for two colors, so that they were sort of diluted five color decks again. And then we see that there was maybe like around 10% of the three color decks in Kamigawa, maybe like 7 in Baldur's Gate. And then Midnight Hunt, Zendikar, Crimson Vow, AFR, these are under 5% of the three color decks. They were basically almost never played. Dominaria United is not as predominant in terms of three color decks as Streets of New Capenna was. But again, we see that the split between three color decks and three color decks with a splash is 50-50. While in the Streets of New Capenna, look, this part of the graph, the Streets of New Capenna splashed to non-splashed, which probably is sort of like 8-1 or in favor of the non-splashed three-color decks. This reminds me of the two-color decks of the pure two-color formats, when they play pure two-color much more frequently than two colors and a splash. So that gave me the idea that Streets of New Capenna is sort of like a three-color format pure. You don't want to put more than three colors, and you probably can't put less than three colors very frequently because it's not easy to draft a two-color deck. Okay, but of course, apart from having two colors and three color decks, there are also more color decks. And in the last 10 sets, Streets of New Capenna and Kaldheim were the formats where people drafted four or five colors. Again, the difference being that in Streets of New Capenna, it was mainly pure four-color decks that were around 2%, and then you had another percent of four-color and splash and five-color decks. While in Kaldheim, there are a few pure four-color decks, a bunch of four-color decks with a splash, and then some five-color decks. They're roughly 3% again. Strixhaven also had some multicolor decks, and it was around 1%. Kamigawa maybe had like 0.4, 0.3% of the decks, almost nothing in the other sets in terms of 4 or 5 colors. Dominaria, over 6% of the decks are 4+ colors. That's double Streets of New Capenna, double Kaldheim in terms of prevalence of those decks. And again, lots of them are 4-color straight, but more than half of them are 4-color splash and 5-color decks. So plenty of the 5-color madness in this particular format. Okay, this is another way of looking at it, and it shows you the sort of penalty for adding colors. So this line, the 0, this is the average win rate for the format. If something is above that line, it means that decks from this category do better than the average. And if something is below that line, it means that the decks do worse than the average. Quite straightforward. So to give an example of the Baldur's Gate, you can see that you get a slight advantage of playing two-color decks when you play Baldur's Gate. And then as you add splash or three colors or three colors in splash or four colors in splash, your win rate is way below the average. So playing four colors in splash in Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate was a penalty of roughly 10 percentage point in terms of win rate. If you played five color decks in Midnight Hunt, roughly 20 percentage points lower win rate. That's a lot. That's more than Mulligan will punish you. So basically, playing a five color deck in Midnight Hunt was like starting with the Mulligan every game because there was no overlapping synergies, no support, fixing was not good enough, etc., etc. And that made for the fact that this format was really almost exclusively two color. Now, you might be surprised that the bonus for playing two-color decks is so small, but then when you think that roughly 80% of the decks were two colors, the average, so the zero is based on the average for the whole format, cannot be that much different from the average for two-color decks because most of the average is made by the two-color decks. So that's the reason why they are only slightly better than the average. And still, they are better than the average, which tells you something about the format. So keep in mind, make them like a memory snapshot of this graph because the next one is other five sets, but it has exactly the same scale, so you can compare it if you remember this one. And these are all the two-color formats, and these are all the formats where multicolor stuff could happen. Now, first things first, Streets of New Capenna, two-color decks were best, two colors in the splash slightly worse. Three color decks were doing on par. Again, not surprising because most of the decks in that format were three colors. So, but they, of course, form most of the average win rate. But then every color added was a penalty. And very much this graph, in terms of its shape, like with every complexity level that you add to the deck, you get a decrease in the win rate. These decks, it's a very similar graph to these ones. It's just that the medium point is three colors rather than two colors as in the other graphs. So basically, Streets of New Capenna was not a multicolor format. It was a three-color format point. You wanted to play three colors or two if you could draft a two-color deck. Now, all the other formats here, you don't see an increasing punishment for adding more colors to the deck, which makes those formats multicolor formats in a way. Now, how frequently would the multicolor deck come together in those formats differ? So, as you maybe remember, Strixhaven and Kaldheim. So Kaldheim roughly 3% of the time you got those multicolor decks. And actually, in Kaldheim, weirdly, five-color decks had a plus. This is probably a data artifact because most of those five-color decks in Kaldheim were drafted in the first week of the format. And in the first week of the format, you could get any number of snowlands that you wanted. Like there was literally, I was drafting like 12 snowland decks with still busted cards because I could wheel all those snowlands. Because of that, they were quite powerful. Later, people started challenging snowlands, and it was hard to make a coherent five-color deck. But okay, enough of those digressions. Characteristic trait of those multicolor decks is that you don't see a big penalty for adding colors. Now, of course, every time that you add a color to the deck, you punish yourself a bit because you will lose games due to bad mana. It will happen naturally. There's no way around it. If you play five colors, sometimes you will draw the sources for three colors and spells from the other two colors. It will just happen. So in most formats, in the two-color formats, this disadvantage cannot be overcome by the power of drafting five colors. Because, again, there is a lack of synergy. Mana is probably particularly bad in those formats. Probably a bunch of other caveats. And that means that adding extra color will sort of linearly decrease your win rate because you won't get any bonus for adding the colors. You will get all the negative sides of adding the colors. That's why you see those kind of like steep drop-offs. In format like Strixhaven, say, you have some cost of adding third color, but adding fourth on top of the third one, it somehow is equilibrated. So of course there is still a punishment for adding the fourth color because you need fourth set of lands and whatever. But there must be some advantage of adding that fourth color that sort of equilibrates the cost of adding extra color. So something in playing four colors in Strixhaven compensated for the fact that the mana was worse. And then adding fifth color, also the punishment is not so big. So basically, you stay on the stable level independently if you play 3, 4, or 5 colors, or 4 colors in the splash. If you look at those punishments in Dominaria United, they are the smallest. So it's roughly between 1 and 2% drop in win rate by playing 5 colors, even compared to the average win rate. Which means that this format is really accommodating for playing multicolor decks because there is fixing, it's possible to play them, and the penalty for playing them is low, which means that the combination of fixing and the synergies between all 5 colors is enough to basically overcome this penalty of playing a dirty multicolor deck. Hopefully that is quite understandable for you. So basically, yes, 4 of the formats in the last 10 were sort of multicolor formats, even though in Strixhaven and Kamigawa, those 5 color decks came relatively rarely. So like in Kamigawa, 0.4%, Strixhaven roughly 1%, and Kaldheim roughly 3% of the decks were there. In DMU, they come together much more frequently. 6%, over 6% of the decks are 4 colors or more. And also the penalty of playing multicolor decks is the smallest that you possibly can have from all the other 10 sets. Right. Now, that's all and good. But what kind of multicolor decks do people play? Because if you go to, and maybe I can wait a second. Can I jump there? Analytics, format color rankings. Okay, stop screen. Let's see. Share screen. Let's try 17 lands. Okay. So if you look at the win rate website from 17 lands, and you look at 4 color decks or 4 colors in splash, you see them all aggregated. You don't know what people play. And of course, there is a case to be made that if you play a 4 color deck, you probably splash the 5th color and stuff like that, and it doesn't matter that much, and the sample sizes are normally really small. Like here you have 10,000 games of 4 color decks, but if you would go to something like Crimson Vow, come on, speedy computer, you would have like 100 games. So there is, of course, no point of splitting them into 5 categories. But because there is 10,000 games in a DMU, it would be interesting to know a bit more about the frequency of those decks being played. So let's go back to my thing. Okay, so what I did is I basically looked through this table from 17 lands for each combination of colors that I could find. Now, I don't know if there was splashes or not. That's the one thing I couldn't do out of that data. But I basically counted how many cards were played in each color combination. And then I very cunningly summed it up. All the cards that were played, it's important that it's played, not drawn. I summed them all up and I then divided them by 23 and rounded up. Or rounded basically. Because most decks will have 23 spells. So if I know how many cards were played in total, and of course there is no basic land statistics in this table, And divided by 23, I more or less get the number of games played by each deck. And that tells me something about the popularity of different color combinations. Like I don't want to say that Jeskai is more popular than Abzan because there is like 1,000 games difference, because that 1,000 game difference might be related to, I don't know, maybe more 16 land decks in one of those archetypes, or maybe one has a much higher win rate, and therefore because it has higher win rate it plays more games, but not because there's more drafts being drafted in this color combination, but just because it plays an extra game every draft or something. But there's probably like three main categories of the different color combinations. Like, first thing you want to see, three color combinations are played much more than the four colors and five color combinations. Sultai, blue, black, green, is the most played deck by far. And here we see also that's almost double as frequently played as the second most popular deck. So Sultai is the color to go for people. And I think that there's several reasons for that. And one is Urborg Repossession being black-green, and the other is being blue, being probably the most important color for multicolor decks, which is strange because green is technically the domain color, but I think that as we will see a bit later, blue is probably the most color um, for playing multicolor decks. Then we have like a big cluster of decks, and we have Band, Jeskai, Abzan, Esper, Timur, and Naya. I think still fits in there. This is like the second tier in terms of popularity. So bunch of blue-white decks in there, generally white and blue almost everywhere. Not a lot of red and black, but some. So that's the thing to see. Then we have like the third tier of the three color decks, and that will be Mardu, Riveteers, Jund, and Grixis, and one of the most popular four color combination, which is white, blue, black, and green. So basically four colors without red, five colors without red. And this is like a big outlier in terms of four color decks. Like this combination of the I know that you would like that. You like. I'm glad that you like the use of Riveteers. I just don't want to be called the Junt Boomer. That's why I'm using the cool names like Riveteers that young people are using everywhere. And then we have like a bunch of the four color decks and the five color decks. We have four colors without black. That's quite popular. Four colors without white. That's also quite popular. And then we have the five color decks. There's like 4,000 games. Dangaremga, yes, I think that you're absolutely right that four colors without red is the defender deck. That's probably the reason for playing that kind of combination. Yeah, good old Wooberg, 3,000 something games. That's a lot compared to previous formats. That's really a lot. And the least popular color combination will be without five colors without blue and five colors without green. Still, people tend not to try to play four colors without green if they can. And without blue is also quite a rare thing because, as you will see, blue is quite important for playing those multicolor concoctions. Hey, come on. Okay. Now, in terms of win rate, I looked at all those decks' win rate, and it's a lot of reading. But a couple of things that you want to notice. Best win rate of all those color combinations is Uberg, so without the white, at 57%. Lowest win rate is Wooberg without, well, basically five colors, but except that it doesn't have any blue. And that has 53.5%, which means that the difference between the best and the least is 3.5 percentage points. That's a small difference. Like most of those, like you see, like all those first decks are roughly at the same level, which shouldn't be a surprise because those decks have a very similar card pool they can build from. Those differences shouldn't be large. Like there's literally cards that adding this card to a deck of a particular combination increases the win rate by more than the difference between the best and the least color combination. Uh, Yes, Holy Frog. That's basically because those decks should be roughly samey. There is still some differences, and you have to think. However, even when you look at it, this is quite striking that blue, 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 blue. So the first nine archetypes in terms of win rate all have blue in it, and this is probably not by chance. Um, Blue seems like the predominantly important color in terms of those multicolor decks. Uh, Decks with blue have highest win rate. There's a bunch of decks without blue in this lower bracket. So you have the no blue, no blue, no blue, no blue, no blue. So there's two of them that do have blue and still are in the lower bracket, but most of those are in the top. And at the same time, red, 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 red. So the last six, seven archetypes in terms of win rate, six archetypes in terms of win rate, all have red in them. So what this sort of suggests is that red, no bueno, blue, bueno. That's a very simplistic description of what goes on in there. Obviously, it's a bit more complicated than that, but it seems like not having red in your multicolor deck is not a tragedy. Not having blue in your multicolor deck is probably not a smart idea. Now, keep in mind when you're talking about, well, Maria's Outriders, that's an interesting one. So keep in mind that if we have this Esper deck, white, blue, black, that doesn't mean that there is no Maria's Outriders in that deck. It can be splashed. This one doesn't take into account the splashed cards if they are only present in small numbers. And I can see easily that you have a free color deck that doesn't have red as one of the main colors, but has Maria's Outrider as a splash. And probably that's even better because if you splash your Maria's Outriders, you're more likely that if you can cast them, you will have like a full domain from whatever you have in your deck, rather than when red is your main color, because then you will just draw many red sources, and then maybe you will not draw your other sources, and it will just deal like free. So yeah, there are drawbacks of looking at the table data from 17 Lands. Of course, I would be happy to have the full data when I could go super deep into those analyses, but I don't have them, so I have to improvise and get as much as I can from those tables. Okay. It needs to be more than 3 and some blue sources. So this is the question of Dangaramenga. God, I love your nick, by the way. Just a tongue twister to kill streamers. Dangaremga asks, how many blue cards does a deck need to count as a blue deck? 5, and it's more than 3. It's more than 3, and at least some sources of blue mana in the mana base. That's the requirements for being a main color. Okay. And as we're talking about the wall decks, my feeling would be that the strongest combination for wall deck is Abzan, black, white, and green. But you still want to have blue in your decks, so probably white, blue, black, and green, because you have the green wall is really strong. It helps you fixing. It helps you hitting your land drops, and you want to have a lot of mana in this deck. Black and green gives you Urborg repossession. That will allow you to recur those walls. White gives you the best wall, obviously, duh. But also the black 2/4 wall I think is important. So we want to have black for that. And then it depends on how many green walls you have. Um, oh yeah, you can splash Urborg. Yeah, of course you can do that. I think that the 2/4 wall is really good because if you have like now I played with Chaplain a couple of times because before that I never managed to draft the card, but I finally got it. And I've noticed that people now learn that they don't attack into your Chaplain because they know that you're just going to recur it. So the black wall is a nice way of making sure that you can sacrifice your Chaplain, get it back to your hand, replay it, and get all the value. But enough about the walls. Right. So I'm very proud of this one. There is absolutely no data about archetype speed in the 17 lands data tables, alas. So what I did was I looked at every archetype table in 17 lands, and maybe again I will jump between the screens. Share screen, because it's easier to describe it on the 17 lands, I think. So what I did is I took, for example, let's take Esper. And I took Esper and I looked at the number of cards in hand and number of cards not drawn. Even simpler, number of cards that were played in total and number of the time that a card was in the hand. And I took it for every single card. Like I added up basically all those columns and divided them by each other. And basically, if you do that, you get the number, which will be probably somewhere between 40 and 50% in most archetypes. And that tells you what percentage of your deck do you draw on average in each deck. This is a good approximation of the speed of each archetype. The larger percentage of your deck you draw, the longer the games usually last. Now, I get it. There are cards that are card draw that will be disproportionately used in some archetypes and not in the other. So I know that those caveats exist, but it's a good proxy at least for the speed of the archetype. And if you do that, so I can do it for Esper, then I can go for Sultai and do the same. So I basically add up all the numbers in this, and divide those two by each other, and come up with the number. So that's what I did here. Let's go back to the. So that's what I did here. And you basically got this gradient of speeds. And you can see first decks, again, will be all the blue ones. But this one, I think, has something to do with the presence of Phyrexian espionage, because all the top decks have something to do with blue. So I guess that there is an effect of Phyrexian espionage being in the format. But what does it mean that you draw 50% of your cards? That means that you draw 20 cards each game. What does it mean that you have 40% of the deck, that you drew 40% of the deck? That means that you draw roughly 16 cards. So the difference is 4 cards. Even if each blue deck was casting one Phyrexian espionage during the game and maybe a Tolarian Gazer, that's still 3 cards. That doesn't account for everything. So I'm pretty sure that quite a lot of this effect is real, even though maybe it's not as big as seen here. It's not like it's not the difference between that this deck is 4 turns slower. It's probably more like 1-2 turns slower than this one, but still probably it is slower. Now I'm going to be very keen on confirming that with the actual game speed data when I will get it, and then I can actually look at what is the importance of um, yeah, exactly. 4 cards is 10%. Yeah, but the multiples are counted in there, Danga Rambega. Right now in 17 lands, the times of so again, I will repeat the question maybe for the audio version. Doesn't blue also have the most cards you want multiples of, like as many terrors as you can get, and then all the 1 mana spells you can get? Yes, but it's not a problem anymore because now it takes into account the number of particular card drawn. So if you have 4 terrors and you drew 2, you will know from the data that you drew 2 terrors and not that you just drew terror and that's it. So the multiple cards bias is removed from the 17 lens data, so you can actually now ignore it, sort of. I think that every deck with blue will be drawing more, but also every deck with blue will want to play a longer game. So these are two things that will sort of impose on each other. And again, I'm going to be super interested in looking at this data and then comparing it with the actual game length data, and based on that, estimate how much card draw is happening in games. Because if I get the proper data that has how long was the game, I will know the exact average game length of the Esper deck, and I will know how many cards the Esper deck drew. I will be able to sort of estimate on how many cards did the Esper deck draw from the draw phases, and how many cards did the Esper deck draw from the actual draw spells. And when then I compare, and I will be able to calculate how much card draw each archetype uses, and again, based on that, I can sort of link the number of card draw and win rates, and then maybe do some basically I could do some deeper analysis on that, because I think that card draw is quite important. Um, Quite important in this particular format. It's quite important to draw cards because card draw spells have really high win rate. So it will be super curious to see if I can link win rates with the number of cards drawn on top of everything. Omnat Nods also mentions that Vinewall draws a card when it finds a non-basic land. Yeah, that's true. Also, in the proper data set, I will also have data about basic lands. The win rate page. Here we are, the win rate page. You can take a look at those. So yeah, it would be interesting to basically link link how many cards you draw extra, and see if there is a link between those things and a win rate. I did it like ages ago, and I showed that drawing more cards than your opponent increases your chances of winning the game, and spending more mana than your opponent increases the chances of winning the game. But it would be interesting to see it from this aspect, because I never did this analysis before. So if I superimpose this on the game length duration, then I can come up with some conclusions, hopefully. Okay, next category is key cards. And basically there are 16 color combinations that are three or more colors in the game. There's 10 three color combinations, five four color combinations, and Wooburg. So 17 lands only shows you the win rate if a card exceeds a certain threshold, when it's deemed that this number can be at least to some extent meaningful. This is to avoid showing cards that have a very small sample size and like 100% win rate, because it's based on 3 games. So because of that, seeing how frequently do I see a win rate for a particular card is a nice way of visualizing the importance of that particular card. Now, because not every color combination contains a given color, each color will have 11 archetypes when it should be as a main color, because you have 6 three color combinations that contain each color, 4 color combinations that contain it, and Wooburg, so 6, 4, and 1, 11. This means that if card is appearing at a meaningful number in more than 11 archetypes, it means that it's not only played in decks that contain, let's say, in case of Maria's Outrider, that contain red as a main color, but it's also frequently splashed as an additional color. Oh, the bar graphs. Yeah, these are just made based on my based on those tables, but I uploaded the data, just copy pasted them into a worksheet and just did them like that. Right. So, for example, Maria's Outriders was played in 14 archetypes, even though only 11 contain red as a main color, which means Maria's Outrider is played in every single one that has red, but also is splashed in some archetypes that don't even have red as one of the main colors, which shows that people really think that this is an important card. Salvage Mana Worker, that's a colorless card. It can be in all 16 archetypes. Usually you find it in 13 of them at a meaningful level. And I think that one of the cards that will be quite important the more colors you play, because it will help you, play those difficult costs sometimes. And the 1/3 body can stop some attacks early as well. Yeah, Kulrik, sorry, I'm not yet putting the presentations available to everyone. I think I'm going to start it as a part of Patreon when I start a Patreon. But this stuff is going to be all on YouTube, so you can later go on YouTube, just make screenshots. I'm not gonna chase you for making screenshots of my graphs, definitely. So that's all fine. Another card that appears in more than 11 archetypes is Urborg Repossession. So there's, well, actually, probably that's even, well, okay. Urborg Repossession technically is a green-black card, but let's treat it as a black card. There are 11 black archetypes. This shows up in 12 archetypes, which means that some non-black archetypes splash it because the card is probably format defining right now. Then you have like a bunch of cards that appear in 11, which makes me assume they appear in all the archetypes that contain their main color. So Phyrexian Espionage, Tolarian Gazer, Lightning Strike, Floriferous Vinehole, Scout the Wilderness, Sunbathing Rootwalla, and Yavimaya Sojourner. All those cards appear in 11 archetypes. So basically every single archetype that contains the color that is their main color. And there is a bunch of cards that appear in 10 of the archetypes that contain the color. Artillery Blast, the white spell that deals damage to attacking creatures. That's particularly good in multiple so the more colors you have, probably the better the card, because of course it becomes more powerful. And I think that it's especially important to get at least 4 different land types, because then you can kill the Tolarian Terror with it. And I think that killing Tolarian Terror is the thing that you really want to be doing in this in this format. Then you have Phyrexian Rager. That also appears in 10 archetypes. Tribute to Urborg, the removal. Deathbloom Gardener, the 3 mana 1/1 death touch that gives mana. Gaia's Might, Magnigot Sentry in the 4/4 Reach Creature, and Vineshaper Prodigy. These are all present in 10 different archetypes. So these are the cards that are like people put in all types of decks that can support them, basically. Now, I'm not saying that these cards have a high win rate, because some of them do, some of them don't. But this is what people think is the core of multicolor decks, at least. And then, of course, sprinkle the bombs. The bombs will never be that prominent because they are rare. They will not make the numbers to be significant in terms of the win rate. Okay, so top cards. And how I calculated top cards is I calculated average win rate for each of the 16 archetypes. I took a card, if it had a win rate in an archetype, I compared the win rate of the card to the average win rate of the archetype. So say that the average win rate of the archetype is 56. If a card has 59% win rate, this would mean it's +3. So it's 3 above the average of the archetype. And then I took this number from each of the archetypes that has the win rate for that particular card, and I made the average of those just to sort of calculate them along multiple archetypes, but without giving preference to the more played archetypes. So that basically I didn't want to have stats for herd migration based on exclusively Sultai, because Sultai was so much more predominant. This is not this is improvement in, so this is how much better than the average win rate is the win rate of that card. And this is average across all the archetypes that have enough data to show that card. Now these are the top cards, so obviously this will be heavily tilted towards rares. And because it's heavily tilted towards rares, these cards are not in every archetype. No. Color combination pink plants. Sorry, it's always confusing to use archetype or color combination. Technically, I know that there can be 3 different Esper archetypes, but it's the same color combination. But because the data only showed the color combinations, I'm sort of shorthanding color combination for archetype. So yeah, best cards in terms of improvement with win rate: Archangel of Wrath, Squee, Wingmantle Chaplain. These cards do better by like 5 to 4% over the average win rate of the format. Herd Migration, Llanowar Green Widow. So these are the sort of like busted or semi-busted rares. Because I think that, okay, Herd Migration is not a busted rare on its own, but in my multicolor decks, it's just a particularly good build around, basically. Wingmantle Chaplain, not busted on its own, really strong build around because of the guarantee of drawing. Llanowar Green Widow, that's sort of rate monster with recursion capabilities, so that's great. Vodalian Mindsinger, again, in multicolor decks, you will have a multi-kicker for it much more frequently. Sphinx of Clear Sky, another card that is really strong. This one, I played it once and it was terrible in my deck because every time I played it, I couldn't attack with it because I would mill myself. So yeah, be careful of playing Sphinx of the Clear Skies. So people seem to be surprised about Squee. I never played with it, so I don't know exactly. But maybe there are some decks that are good in self-milling, and because of that, Squee is pretty useful for them. Here we have a couple of uncommons in Nishoba Brawler, the 2 mana X3, where X is the number of land types that you have. So very often 5/3 in those decks with Trample for 2 mana. 5/3 Trample for 2 mana is not a bad rate. Sprouting Goblin is the goblin that can search for lands that has a basic type, so it can actually really boost your domain count because you can find the land that has everything that you're missing. And then you have like some bombs again: Silverback Elder, Nemata, Primeval Warden, and another uncommon, Weatherseed Treaty. That card has really impressive numbers in those multicolor decks. It's not surprising. This is the saga that looks for a basic land, then makes saproling, and then gives something plus X and trample, where X is your domain. But this card is really, really, really good in good numbers in terms of the win rates. It's. I think that it's basically a sort of sub genre of its own, the Weathersea Treaty. Because if you play a green deck with some black recursion and multicolor, you can play things like Maro for 5 mana, where it's very frequently a 10/10. And then because you have black and green, you can recur the Weathersea Treaty using the kicked Urborg repossession and just play it. Just use the third chapter instantly, give your Maro +5/+5 and trample, and just dome your opponent for as much as you have, because 15/15 trampler will do some serious damage. But that's another digression. Elder Dragon War, that's a bomb. Drag to the bottom is a removal. And here we have the only common on that list, Shield Wall Sentinel. But Shield Wall Sentinel number of it improves the on average win rate by 2.3 percentage points. But probably majority of it is because it searches for Wing Metal Chaplain. And Wing Metal Chaplain is busted. So something that brings Wing Metal Chaplain and actually makes it better is also going to be quite good. Right, what else do we have here? This is same measurement, but I looked at cards that are universal, and that by universal cards I mean cards that are present in at least 8 of those 16 archetypes that I've been showing, that are present to the extent where actually there is data for them in 17 lands. And that I already mentioned Nishoba Brawler and the Weathersea Treaty. These are the two cards that were there. Apart from that, we have Micromancer and Rona's Vortex next to each other. Not accidental, I think, that they are next to each other, because Micromancer will search for Rona's Vortex more often than for any other card. We have Prayer of Binding and Hurl and Battle Hymn. So we have 3 removals next to each other. They all improve by roughly 2 percentage points on the average of their actual. No, it's not a Micromancer. It's a Micromancer. Trust me, I'm a microbiologist. I'm not going to turn one of the few cards with the word micro in it into a Micromancer. Mercurio, by the way, hi. Phyrex and Missionary, again, 2 percentage point improvement on the average win rate. I guess that not every of the archetypes is able to kick it, so that's going to be interesting to see how frequently you can kick it on the win rate. I have a big plan of once I get my hands on the proper data, because I can't do it with this one, to see which cards improve the most with the capability of being kicked. Because I don't think it's going to be very even. So I think some cards must be kicked, some cards don't have to be kicked at all and are still good. And I want to see what is the impact of being able to kick a card on its win rate. That's going to be a little project for me once the data gets released. And then we have Tolarian Gazer, Territorial Maro that I mentioned before. Again, Weathersea Treaty, Maro, nice. Fires of Victory, Essence Scatter, Rootwalla, Lightning Strike, Espionage, and Gaia's Might. So we have a good mixture of cards that are just good, of cards that are particularly good in 5-color decks. So we have Nishaba Brawler here, Maro, and Rootwalla, that special cards that are. It's important for them to have 5 colors, basically, or 4 colors. So Mercury is asking, I wonder if Urborg Repossession is good without the kicker. I did play it several times without the kicker, but that was mainly to recur Chaplain, and then it's good. If you can get 4/1/1s for 4 mana, that's fine. Yeah, but it's true that reposition cards pivots you into green. But I just had like a couple of games where I didn't just draw green mana, and it was still absolutely fine to play it without a kicker if I was recurring the chaplain and instantly playing it. Okay. So these are the cards that are universal and good. So these are not only in most decks, but these actively make those decks better. So it's good to memorize them. And I think that there's a couple of surprising-ish cards in that collection. Like first things to notice is that there's plenty of removal. Verona's Vortex, Prayer, Herlun Battle Hymn. Gazer is a sort of like a tempo removal, which is also important, and it works very well, and you can get it relatively late. There's Fires of Victory, Essence Scatter, I count as a removal, and Lightning Strike. So these cards just are very good for this deck, especially if you notice this is a lot of this is cheap removal. So you have a 2 mana staff, 3 mana staff, max 4 mana. But for 4 mana, you want like premium removal, like Rona's Vortex and Prayer of Binding that will give you also some life. So yeah, cheap interaction is key, and that's probably what you should be focusing on. There's a bunch of those 5 color payoffs, and it sort of looks like two different kind of styles of deck. One is more controlling with the big top end, and the other one is more aggressive and with those 5 color domain payoffs like Rootwalla, Nishoba Brawler, and Mara, and with possible help of Weatherseed Treaty. Okay, now the opposite. The cards that are played in lots of decks but actively damage your win rate. And here there's particularly 3 traps that emerge. Elfheim Worm, the 5/4 Vigilance Trampler, that drops your win rate by 3 percentage points below the average. And the same with Molten Monstrosity, the 8 mana 5/5 Trample that you can play cheaper depending on how big is your biggest creature. Again, 3 percentage points drop in win rate by playing it. And Stall for Time, the 3 mana white tap 2 creatures, draw a card with the blue kicker. They don't tap until end of turn. So these are the biggest traps. Other cards that drop your win rate are Soaring Drake, Jodas Codex, Shore Up, Scout the Wilderness. I think that especially Scout the Wilderness is something that people are going to play. It shows that it's sort of like 1 percentage points, 1.3 percentage points lowers the win rate of your decks on average compared to the same decks. Um, um, Compared to the average win rate of those decks. Now, this doesn't mean that they're equally bad in every single archetype, but it means that on average they are slightly poorer. I think that, and especially like Tolarian Terror, which is on that list as dropping your win rate by 1 percentage point from compared with the average. Tolarian Terror is exceptionally good in some archetypes, but it's also pretty bad in some other archetypes. And it's worth remembering this card is not universally good. And people try to play it as it is universally good, and because of that, you see that number. I mean, in some archetypes, it's excessively good. I don't remember now exactly which one we're talking about, but in some, it's just not. First Fist Strider, I think that there is a case to be made for some cards that have double pip costs to be slightly lower based on that double pip cost. I also saw that if you look at the cards that are way better in 3-color decks than in 4-color decks, the 4 mana 3/2 flyer that dies and draws a card out of 2, that one was one of the underperformers there, because again in 4-color decks double pips are a bit costly. Yeah, exactly, cilantro. It's just like this 4/4 body in the end doesn't block the Larian Terror or the Breathing Necromass. And yeah, it might tap something for a turn, but that's not enough of tempo for you. It's I think that Frost Strider, Bergstrider, the strength of Bergstrider was that Bergstrider was the Tolarian Terror of the format. It was basically you played on turn five, tapped something, attacked with the one, played the next one, tapped another thing, and then you were like in a situation when you were just dominating the game. Here you tap something, they play a Tolarian Terror, and that's the end. Also, you will not chain them because it's an uncommon, so there's little chance of you having more than one. Um, yeah, and Talas Outrider was the same card that it does much worse in full color decks because probably it is harder to cast in those decks. One thing that surprised me a bit is the Pixie Illusionist. But, keep in mind that 1 percentage point drop in the win rate is not it's not terrible. I would say that these cards are the ones that you should be watching and avoiding playing. But these ones are probably still okay. And again, these some of these cards will be really good in a couple of archetypes, but this is looking across multiple of them, and because of that, the average might be lower than 0. Okay, and this is like possibly the last category. It's best cards with alpha that is higher than 4. I don't know why I wrote lower. It should be higher. Uh, can I? Uh, can I get out of the full screen? Anyway, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean. It's the cards that go later in the draft. And number one is Shieldwall Sentinel, still going late in the draft. Because why would you pick it if you don't need it most of the time? However, if you have Winged Chaplain, all of a sudden it becomes one of the best uncommons that the game has seen in terms of limited. Armagerd, Soaring Drake. I just think it just doesn't do enough. It's just like sort of meh. That's the problem with that card. Upwap, pretty marked difference between Stall for Time and Tolarian Gazer, despite similar tempo plus draw a card. Yeah, so Gazer is not only tempo in terms of tempo, but it also costs the opponent mana. If you bounce something that costs 4 mana, they spend 4 mana, they have to respend the 4 mana, and that's like massive difference. While Stall for Time, it's just mildly annoying. And I think that Stall for Time will be much better in some decks that can capitalize it better because they have a fast clock. While the decks that are 4 or 5 colors, they usually don't have like the super fast clock. Okay. So yes, this Shieldwood Sentinel is obviously one of the best cards when you have Wingmantle Chaplain, and that's not going to be very frequently. Once you want it, you really want it, and that's why it has such a high win rate, because it is basically twinned with the Wingmantle Chaplain, which is busted. Other cards that go late and have reasonably high win rate. Micromancer, that card still goes up too late, in my opinion. It's really good. It has many targets. It brings the Urberk Repossessions. It brings the Rona's Vortex, all good cards. So yeah, keep in mind that this card goes too late, and it's really good in those multicolor decks. Tolarian Gazer, good in multicolor decks, 58% win rate. Here there's an interesting package, Protected Negotiators and Ertai's Scorn, both of them at 57.5-ish. So counterspells are strong, it seems, in this format. And even Ertai's Scorn, which doesn't look like super impressive, is quite strong. Especially when that people very often will play repossession, play a threat. So you can sometimes cast it even if you don't have the second blue mana, because they will cast 2 spells per turn quite easily. And if you have 2 blue, you can just counter the repossession and ruin their carefully laid plans. Clockwork Drawbridge, high win rate, but that's probably linked again with the what's the name, Wingmantle Chaplain. And then we have Walking Bulwark as well. Same situation. There's plenty of walls in that list. But we have Essence Scatter as one of the cards that go late and have a high win rate. Still one of the best cards in every metric that I looked. Essence Scatter was appearing very favorably there. Yeah, but so Cilantro says that the drawbridge is pretty bad in decks without Chaplain. But the beauty of it is that probably 90% of the time it's played is in the deck with Chaplain. So there you go. Phyrexian Espionage goes late. Cards has also excellent numbers. So interesting to see. Destroy Evil, really good numbers for this card. I was honestly didn't think that it will be good when I looked at this, how the format aligns with the stats that it's destroying. But I didn't take into account that those 5 toughness creatures are going to be disproportionately important in drafts, and I also didn't count that actually there's going to be a whole genre of decks that play combat tricks that make something huge. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, and you can also remove the enchantment removal if in against decks where exactly this card would have been dead if it only killed toughness creatures. All of a sudden, it can kill a removal spell of their own. So that's quite a cool. Because of that, it's almost never a dead card. There will always be something to do with it. Then we have Wrath, Vineshaper Prodigy, Coral Colony, Magnigoth Sentry. That's another important card, I think, because I noticed that losing to flyers is a possibility when you play those dirty 5-color decks. I think that having like a Magnigoth Sentry in the deck is making you much more comfortable than if you didn't put them. And Take Up the Shield is still good in decks that are dirty. It has really good stats in most of the sub archetypes, which I didn't expect really, because this looks like a tempo card for aggressive decks. You still want your Take Up the Shields in your dirty 4-color decks, shockingly. And then you have Impulse, Gaia's Might, and Sunbathing Rituala. So these are the cards that have a decent win rate. This game played win rate, so that relates to the strength of the decks that those cards are played in. But they have decent win rate and high alsa, which means you can get them quite late. Yeah, probably Mercurio. Divination wasn't. I mean, technically, some claim that Behold the Multiverse was a divination that was good. Tamio's Epiphany from War of the Spark was decent, I guess. Okay, pop quiz. That's a divination of sorts. Okay. I said some people claim. I'm just making fun of LSV, obviously. So last slide for the data part. These are the cards that are doing better in 4-5-color decks than 3-color decks. And that's relatively better. So basically, I looked at how much they improve a 3-color decks, how much did they improve a 4-5-color deck, and check the difference. So that means that if Territorial Maro improves your 3-color deck by 1 percentage point, it will improve your 4-5-color deck by 2.4 percentage points. So there is a difference between 1.4% between the improvement on the 3-color deck and the 4-color deck. So this is just to show you that are there the cards that are doing particularly well when you have a guarantee of having more domain targets. So yeah, shocking, no? Territorial Mara is quite obvious that it's going to do better in 5-color decks, because obviously the more lands, the bigger it becomes. That is not to say that 3 colors deck wouldn't be able to play it as a 10-10, because splashing still doesn't count in the statistics from 17 lands. But good to know that you have that. Vineshaper Prodigy, this one was surprising to me, that it does really, really better in 4-color decks for some reason. I guess that those 4-color decks lose a lot to not being able to draw what they need particularly, and that card selection from Vineshaper Prodigy, plus like a disposable 2/2 body that you can chuck under the train, looks more important in those decks than in 3 colors. So I think that this card has been slightly disappointing in general, but in 5-color decks, the numbers look much better. Deathbloom Gardener, again, 5-color mana fixer, is good in 5-color decks. Shocking. Even though it doesn't give domain, but it actually might, be this emergency option when you basically can have that access to the mana, even if you don't have the access to the land of that color, just in case. Weirdly timely interference, maybe a cycling just to get you to your land. Gaia's Might, Nishova's Brawler, Joda's Codex, that doesn't require much of the explanation. Weatherseed Treaty, again, that helps you fixing. You have fewer probably sources of each color, so being able to find one is great. Sojourner, that's discounted, and then the effect is really small. And Sunbathing Route, voila. Main point is that a bunch of those cards are the ones where domain seems to be the most important. Also keep in mind that this shows an improvement. Weirdly, Nile was not there. Weirdly, Nile was not there. I don't know why. I mean, maybe people were try-harding too much for Nile. Most of those cards are green, and most of them are heavy domain payoffs. And that's why most of them are green, because it does have enough games played. But I was particularly looking for it when I was looking at the data, but it just didn't make the cut. Yeah. There was not much improvement. It was doing fine in 3-color decks. Again, some of those 3-color decks might have had splash that allowed them to go to domain 5. And I wouldn't have known that. So, as I said, this is as much data as I could get from what's on the 17 Lands website. Hopefully soon, I'm going to get the proper data, and then we can start playing with like more tricky questions and more nuanced approach. And I will definitely do that, because I think that there's plenty of interesting in this data. As I said last week, this set, I think, has the most nuanced data that we had in the last couple of years. And because of that, it's not only a challenging analysis of the data there, but also it can maybe yield some quite surprising results. So I'm secretly looking forward to my archetypist for that format. If you don't know, I'm using some fancy maths to sort of cluster decks based on their composition similarity, and based on that, I can find clusters of successful decks based on their build and see which cards make those particular clusters tick. And this is really archetypes, because I'm not assuming anything. I'm just putting the compositions of the deck and like trying to figure out, are there any subclusters in each color combination. So if we are going to look at Esper, we'll probably find like 3 different versions of Esper that might be very different, and we can see which cards make those differences most apparent and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to that one. But until then, we'll have to wait. Until then, let's thank the 17 Lens team, who are actually, I know, working tirelessly to get the data out of this format. It's been a bit challenging because there's been quite some few new features that needed to be incorporated to the old system. That's always happening when there's a new set. But yeah, let's thank. I would like to really thank Viral Misnomer for ages of helping me and giving me guidance, help, and listening to my nagging. I'm amazed how much patience that does he have. But also Hululu, Grant Wu, and Ale Baldini is at TM. Ale is now working, well, basically full-time, part-time on 17 lands to make sure that everything is tip-top. And I know that he's putting a lot of effort. Mike, the best way to support 17 Lands is Patreon. There is a link to Patreon on the 17 Lands website. I would recommend everyone to click it. I can guarantee you, not a penny of that comes into my pocket. So you can, with free consciousness, donate it and know that it goes to a good cause and not my. I don't even know what I spend money on now. Food, probably. Not my food or things like that. But apart from the 17 Lands team, I would like to really thank Fake Jake Brown, who is helping me in any way that is possible with releasing this in the podcast form. Which, as we are on the topic of podcast, I would like to thank Asescu and Mana Junkie, who made the music that I'm using in the podcast as the intro and outro. So, yeah. And with that, I'll see you next week.